Two down, one to go in a week of legal setbacks in D.C. federal court and New York civil court. Donald Trump says he still plans to be in Manhattan federal court Tuesday for the defamation lawsuit against him by E. Jean Carroll. But new filings in that case may prevent Trump from turning the defamation trial into the circus that played out in his New York civil trial when he launched a barrage of personal attacks against the judge as well as the attorney general. Joining me right now, Kristy Greenberg, former federal prosecutor and former deputy head of the criminal division at SDNY. Welcome here on this Saturday, my friend. So this scene Thursday, I mean, it was wild, right? Trump refused to stick to the facts of the case, then lost his mind when the judge indicated he had one more minute, saying things like, "This is a fraud on me. The person in the room right now hates Trump." He said he should be paid for being prosecuted, telling the judge, "I know this is boring to you. You have your own agenda. You can't listen for more than 1 minute." Well, Judge Engoron at that point said, "Mr. Kais, please control your client." Is this circus act, Kristy, precisely what the judge was trying to avoid? I mean, what does this kind of behavior by Trump? And do you think he's going to get away with it on Tuesday?
So the judge should never have allowed Donald Trump to speak. This was clearly going to be a temper tantrum thrown by a toddler. He already testified as a witness. He actually declined to testify a second time when he had the opportunity to do so. And really, the judge shouldn't be asking Donald Trump's lawyer to control his client. The judge needs to control his own courtroom, and he should have shut this down. Now, the judge had a bomb threat that morning, and hours later, you have Donald Trump attacking this judge personally. He is fanning the flames, and he presents a grave danger to any public servant who may deliver some measure of accountability to him. Do not expect this to happen on Tuesday in federal court before Judge Kaplan. Judge Kaplan is a tough cookie. He suffers no fools, and there will be no nonsense in his courtroom.
So Judge Engoron says he's going to try to deliver a ruling on the civil case by January 31st. And the attorney general is asking Trump org to pay back what she calls ill-gotten gains, like $370 million plus interest. That includes $168 million of saved interest. She also wants a lifetime ban on Trump from doing business in the state, then a 5-year ban on his sons, Eric and Don Jr. What are the odds, Kristy, that the judge grants this?
So I think there is one of those outcomes you mentioned that really scares Donald Trump, and that's that lifetime ban, barring him from participating in the real estate industry in New York and from being an officer or a director of any New York entity. It's the corporate death penalty. And I do believe in this case, the judge is going to impose it on Donald Trump. He is his own worst enemy. His own trial testimony is going to be used against him to do this. Really, the test for this is whether or not there's a reasonable likelihood that there would be a continued violation. There are at least 3 reasons that came up in this trial as to why that would be the case. One is his own lack of remorse, from his own words on Thursday. He has not taken any accountability for his actions. The second being his intent. You know, he is somebody who has said he reviewed and commented on these statements. How did he know he was false? Well, he also testified that nobody is more of an expert in real estate than he is, that he knows more about this than anybody else. He knew the correct square footage of the apartment he lived in. He knew about the deed restrictions on Mar-a-Lago where he lives. He had signed documents to that effect, and that was evidence at trial. And then the third reason, I think, you know, in addition to the lack of remorse and intent, why I think he will get this corporate death penalty is that they have done nothing at the Trump organization to remedy this culture of fraud. You have the CFO who pled guilty to tax fraud. You have the controller who's admitted that he aided and abetted the CFO in doing that because he didn't want to lose his job. Were either of those people fired? No, they weren't. They actually were given severance packages that were quite handsome in exchange for not cooperating with law enforcement. There was no internal investigation to turn things around and make the culture better. So I really think with those things, there's a pattern of fraud here, and the judge will find that that penalty should be imposed.
So his immunity appeal hearing in D.C. last Tuesday, that did not appear to go very well for Trump. And here are 2 key issues that were raised by federal appeals court judges. Take a listen.
Could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached, would he be subject to criminal prosecution?
if he were impeached and convicted first.
I think it's paradoxical to say that his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed allows him to violate criminal laws.
So, Kristy, as you listen to those questions raised by the judges, what's your assessment of them and also the responses from Team Trump?
So Donald Trump's argument that a president cannot be prosecuted unless he is first impeached and convicted, it's just a legal non-starter. There's no basis in the text or the history of the Constitution. And as the judges were pointing out in their hypotheticals, it defies common sense under this theory that a president can order SEAL Team 6 to murder a political opponent, resign, and so then not be impeached or convicted, but then still avoid prosecution. That is not only not the law, it's not anything that the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals or even the Supreme Court, I think, will uphold as the law. So what are they actually doing here? The lawyer that made this argument for Donald Trump, I went to law school with him. He is a smart guy. He's a Rhodes Scholar. He graduated with honors. He clerked for Judge Scalia and Judge Littig and Justice Scalia. They're trying to do two things. One is delay. This is like football. They're trying to run out the clock till the election and get as close as they can to be able to claim election interference. The other thing they're doing, and this was very clear in the oral argument, they're setting the stage of what will happen if Donald Trump wins. Donald Trump's lawyer said that this would open the floodgates, that there would be cycles of recrimination for anyone else in terms of political prosecutions. They actually said, at one point, his lawyer said that Joe Biden could be prosecuted for mismanaging the border, which is, of course, not a crime. So they are telling you what they're going to do if he wins.